If you stumble upon this video or are an unusual, atypical acquaintance, go looking for it. You might wonder what from the onset prompted me. It should be noted that I became educated in college only late in my 50s because of deafness. A great deal of my time was spent in life at menial jobs like washing dishes. I read a lot. I wouldn't call myself self educated. There were healthy influences. My father was in curriculum development, meaning he tried to reform higher education to embrace minorities, just as I have learned the language of curricular reform to try to introduce biology, minority diversity, ecology, botany, in a focus of planetology for sustainable development. My goal in embracing our situation, because of the intellectual heritage we now have to cope with due to the Gaza Holocaust as Americans, is to do a little bit of transparent soul searching about what it is I've learned, believe I've learned over the decades, being born in 1960, about Jewish Holocaust studies and what is happening now in Gaza here in June of 2024 says about how that history is going to be played out in our academic evaluation. I've noted people who are armchair editorialists sometimes raise the question of why book dealers so often have a new book about Nazi Germany. They call it a morbid fascination with the era. While that may be part of the publishing industry's reception, I don't think that that's representative of the educated class. I think the reason why so many books are written and read and reviewed and studied about World War II is because there's a lot of different points of departure with which to approach that. It's not just the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, and it's not just the most horrendous of the pogroms against the Jewish minorities of Europe. There are questions about the Weimar Republic, about German intellectual heritage and how it evolved into or was destroyed to become what it did under the Reich. The development of mass communications, as well as the development of mass industry. The question of misfortune in the wheel of fortune, the issue of the depression, questions of isolationism, hidden sympathies, collaboration, and movie theaters, to say nothing of works of fiction and movies themselves. There are many books by people like Eli Wiesel, who lived through the Holocaust and concentration camps, as did Bruno Bettelheim, Kazetnik. There are Jewish folklore writers of fiction like Chaim Potok. There are brilliant historians of the Jewish experience like Chaim Weizmann. And many of these people weighed in for the foundation of Israel. A woman who I was acquainted with, much to my celebration, went to Spain because she recognized in the 30s the dangers of Mein Kampf. And she fought from the front for the struggle of journalism all the way through the liberation of Dachau, which she witnessed. So there's not one single point of departure, vision, or angle, or student assignment. You can talk about the fiction of the Weimar era and the drama of the Weimar era. We have people like Alfred Doblin and Bertolt Brecht. And the question of resistance fighters, people who tried to abolish Nazism and paid the price, like the White Rose student group. And the untimely deaths of brilliant people like Walter Benjamin. The plight of German emigres, who, with a few exceptions like the celebrated Thomas Mann, lived lonely lives in a foreign country where they couldn't speak the language. The exodus of people trying to get out. The two-faced aspects of businesses trying to stay afloat before the outbreak of war by accommodating the intolerable anti-Semitism that developed in Germany as a policy of state, which affected our willingness to be forthcoming in newsreels, for example. The fratricidal conflicts between the isolationists and the good old boys who were fed up with Joseph Goebbels. The tragedy of Charles Lindbergh is part of the epic. The politician Winston Churchill is certainly part of the epic. And less glorified individuals, such as General Louis Faucher of France, who took off his general's uniform and became a common Czech soldier in fury at the policy of appeasement. And of course, there's questions that are still alarming today regarding the role that was played most honorably by Russia as our allies against Nazi Germany. And all of these had pointed to something Herbert Agar called the saving remnant of Jewry. As painful as that certainly is to hear, if you're Jewish, surely similar in pain to the suffering inflicted by stories like the St. Louis ship that was turned away. The idea of salvation coming from the rescue of those who survived was something that the Roosevelt generation treasured as a way of maintaining our own sanity. I say our own because my father was in World War II, and I have a Jewish half brother from his remarriage. And I grew up in a Holocaust survivor community. The idea that Judaism was imperishable in what Kurt Vonnegut called Mother Night was a talisman that the American servicemen of the Roosevelt and Kennedy caste. The woman I spoke to late in her life was the best friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. The human rights advocates who fought to bring down World War II's maniacal cause in Germany use the idea of a saving remnant as a talisman of hope, by which we unfortunately deceived ourselves. It's true that our chief executive aspirants all play off of that self-deception. But what Israel has done in Gaza is a clear sign of criminal madness. It cannot be excused. How we will deal with it, we of course are unsure. Students of what is called Generation Z, about whom I only know a little, have seen with shock and shame the misappropriation of our legacy by the Biden administration on behalf of a vulture in Israel. It's foolish to construe that as exoneration of violent Muslim extremists, because, for one thing, some of them are partners of Israel, as we learned from Iran-Contra, and get their safety and abundance from allies of Israel in the Middle East. Further, it lacks a sense of proportion. It's reasonable to argue that sometimes disproportionate incidents tell the whole story. I certainly have never accepted with grace and ease the refusal of the U.S. government to accept the refugees on the St. Louis. I've never liked that story. And I don't like the story of the supernova rave for reasons that are idiomatic to my investigations in the 80s of organized crime of a political direction in the United States, authored by the Green Party and the Beatles. But the incident of October 7th, 2023 is not a disproportionate act that tells the whole story in the way that St. Louis can be. It was arguably a slave uprising, as many people have taken it to be. It was arguably a deliberate provocation by people who didn't care about the Palestinians, as I believe. It was arguably a nightmare that went utterly wrong. All of those have to be considered. But one thing cannot be naysay. The Israeli response is diabolical. Somewhere in the way that the Roosevelt generation used the hope that the saving remnant would guide us in humanity, we failed to see the crafty nature of the hatred that twisted souls who went through the inferno arrived at. We should have been more careful. I'm one of those people who cheered Yemen, who, if there was a mutiny, would feel satisfaction. I don't believe America should be cooperating with Israel in any form concerning this horror. I do not believe it. I do not believe Roosevelt, Kennedy, or Eisenhower would cooperate. I don't know what this Biden administration really is. I can't comprehend it. I propose not to try very hard anymore. But I do know that we as scholars are going to have to continue to hold on to our hope about saving remnants. Ayn Rand once said in her pain about what she saw as intolerable attempts to subvert the dignity of human beings from within. She said, I appeal to the remnant of your humanity. In speaking about Nietzsche, the strange woman commended that he had some brilliant things to say, but was inconsistent and contradictory, which didn't subvert entirely the value of his more profound truths. I think the same thing can be said of Ayn Rand. There's a tendency which is a dangerous tendency of scholars, to make anything into a soundbite. I call it bumper sticker heads. People who want to summarize all things by one aphorism, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You could say that the opposite is true, that the road to hell is paved with evil intentions. Not all things boil down to a bumper sticker aphorism. And it's important to realize this in studying a complex subject. Some people will argue that there is a tremendous disconnect between Holocaust trauma and the Gaza genocide, the appalling decision of Israel to do what they have done, and in our names as Americans, which I reject. George Galloway, the leader of the English Workers' Party, mocks the thought that Europeans are somehow wounded in the darkness of their souls about past mistreatment of Jews. He sees this all as the old story of military profiteers at work. Probably right. But that's not true of all of the academic scholars who are going to try to sort out the meaning of this tragedy. So I thought I would do some soul searching in the hopes that I could someday contribute. My father said to me once, I have never been able to forgive Germany. If you want to try, you have my blessing. I don't think I'll ever forgive Israel for this, but if you want to try, you have my blessing.